Yeah. What can you buy when you do an investment? Okay, Liang, yeah, very good. A bond, a stock. That is correct. Yeah, very good. Both are investments. Yeah. So, and here we have the definition. Yeah, it says financial assets. That's the standard that is relevant for us when we're talking about investments. Is cash, which is obvious what cash is. Then an equity instrument in another entity. This is a stock. Yeah, what Liang just wrote. And a contractual right to receive cash or a financial asset of another company. This is a bond. Yeah, so this is a bond. This is a stock. And a contract that will or may be settled in the entity's own equities instrument. Do you remember what this is? What D is? Do you remember what this is? This is an option. Yeah, this is an option. Yeah, it is, Liang, it is a securities. This is right. Yeah, options are securities, but it's a special type of securities. Actually, with options, you buy the right to sell or buy an asset. Yeah, you buy the right to buy or sell an asset. This is an option. Yeah, but it is a security. You're right. When we talk about investing, we have actually two different parties. We have the investor and the investee. And the investor is the person or the entity that owns the shares of a corporation. Yeah. So it can be a company, it can be an individual, anyone who owns shares, and the investee is the party or the corporation that has issued shares. So, for example, if you own shares in Tencent, yeah, if you own Tencent shares, then you are the investor, and Tencent is the investee. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Here we have actually this is Berkshire Hathaway, and as you remember, Berkshire Hathaway is the holding company of Warren Buffett. Now, Warren Buffett is a famous investor. He has a holding company, and within these holding companies, we have companies that are fully owned. Yeah, that is where Berkshire Hathaway owns 100% or so, and there are minority positions, and minority positions are are ownership positions of, let's say, 5 to 7% or something like that. So these are just stocks, yeah. But what we see here is actually the subsidiaries where Berkshire owns a majority position. This is more than 50%, yeah. And here we have, as Berkshire Hathaway is a holding company, it has several subsidiaries, several companies in which it has invested. Yeah, for example, here, this is BNSF. This is a railroad. Yeah, this is a railroad where Berkshire Hathaway owns 100%. Yeah, this is a railroad company. Then we have several insurance companies. Yeah, we have several insurance companies, which are also owned by Berkshire Hathaway. Yeah, these are all majority positions, and they are consolidated. What does consolidated mean? And we will talk about that later in our lecture. Consolidated means that their assets and their liabilities become part of the balance sheet of Berkshire Hathaway. Yeah. So we just talked about the majority position. These are the minority positions where Berkshire Hathaway owns only a small fraction of the stocks. Yeah. So here we have, for example, Coca-Cola, International, IBM, or Wells Fargo. Yeah. And here Berkshire Hathaway owns less than 20% actually. And these positions, these holdings, they are treated differently on the balance sheet. Yeah, here it's not all the assets and liabilities that go into the balance sheet of Berkshire Hathaway, but rather these stocks are just shown with their market value on the balance sheet of Berkshire Hathaway. So as the stock of Coca-Cola, for example, fluctuates, the market value on the balance sheet of Coca-Cola also of Berkshire Hathaway also changes. Yeah. So depending on how large the ownership position is, the treatment on the balance sheet of the parent company, which is Berkshire Hathaway, changes. Yeah. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Okay. So generally, when we're talking about investments, there are short-term investments and long-term investments. And here in this table, we have categorized our investment, and actually we have divided it into 3 categories: financial assets, investments in associates, financial assets, investments in associates, and investments in subsidiaries. And the main criteria is how large the ownership position is. So when we're talking about financial assets, and we touched on that in the last lecture, we're talking about an ownership position of less than 20%. When a company owns less than 20% of a stock, then we have this financial assets category. Then we're talking about this financial assets category. When the ownership positions is between 20 and 50%, then we're talking about investments in associates. Yeah, investments in associates, which is also called equity method. Yeah, equity method. And when the ownership is larger than 50%, then we are on the right side of the table, and we call that investments in subsidiaries or consolidated investment. Yeah, and we're talking about more than 50%, then investments in subsidiaries, or it's also called consolidated. Yeah. Consolidated investments. When we're talking about the first group, financial assets, where the ownership position is less than 20%, we have three different sub categories: amortized costs, fair value through other comprehensive income, and fair value through profit and loss. Yeah. And we will talk about that soon. But generally, for financial assets where the ownership is less than 20%, the owner does not play a large any role in operations. Yeah, here the owner cannot influence the management of the investee company. Yeah, because the ownership stake is actually just too small. Yeah. What's the holding period here for financial assets? Typically, it's short term. Yeah, may also be long term, but typically it's short term. Investments in associates. Here we have 20 to 50% ownership, and the influence is larger. Yeah, why? Because the investor company typically has one board member, and the board member has a saying. Yeah, it can the board member, he can influence the operating policy, the dividend policy, financial policies, all these kinds of things. So the investor company has some influence here. Yeah, so these are typically more long-term investments. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Yeah, if you think about a company that owns let's say 30% of another company, this investment is typically long-term. Yeah, you don't buy 30% of the shares of a company and then sell it after a couple of months. Yeah, instead it's mostly a long-term strategic position. Yeah, the last category on the right side, investments in subsidiaries. Here the investor company can actually control the investee company. Yeah, this is called a subsidiary, and the investor company can control the investee company. Do you remember what control means? Do you remember what control means? When one company controls the other company, then the controlling company can decide. Yeah, when you own more than 50%, you have the majority, and when you have the majority, you can decide what the subsidiary subsidiary has to do. Yeah, you can, for example, change the financial policy. You can change the dividend. You can fire management, whatever you want. Yeah, when you control another company, you are in charge. Is it clear? Do you understand the basic differences of these three categories? Or are there any questions? Yes? Okay. Now, if there are any questions, then do not hesitate to ask me. When you initially recognize financial assets, the relevant moment is when the firm becomes party to the contractual provisions of the asset. So that means that actually accounting here focus on the contract, on the contract, and not on the future economic benefits according to IFRS. What about derecognition? When can you get rid of the asset on the balance sheet? And on the one hand, you can derecognize an asset when the contractual rights to the cash flow of the asset expire. What does that mean? When the contractual, do you have an idea what does that mean when the contractual rights to the cash flows of the asset expire? Exactly, when the maturity date is reached. This is correct. Very, very good. Or when the entity transferred the financial assets, which essentially means that the entity sells the financial asset or sells risk and rewards of the ownership. Yeah, so these are the two options when you are allowed to derecognize a financial asset, or when you have to derecognize a financial asset. First is when the maturity date is reached, or when the financial asset is transferred to another party. Which of the three subcategories? Remember, we are talking about these. We are now in the financial assets categories, and we're talking about these three different subcategories here. We're talking about these subcategories: amortized cost, fair values through other comprehensive income, and fair values through profit and loss. And which of these subcategories to choose depends on the business model and on the contractual cash flow characteristics. So what does business model mean? Whether what does business model mean? You can either hold the assets in order to receive the cash flow. Hold assets in order to receive the cash flow. I call it hold in order to receive the cash flow, or trade. Yeah, you can also trade an asset, buy and sell. And it also depends on the contractual cash flow characteristics. What is a contractual cash flow characteristic of a stock or a bond? Yeah, dividend, exactly. A stock pays a dividend, and the dividend is different than the cash flow of a bond. Yeah, because a dividend changes. Yeah, when the business is better, is doing good, then the dividend is probably increased. When the business is doing bad, then the dividend is decreased, or maybe isn't paid at all. And in the case of a bond, it's different. Yeah, because the cash flows of a bond, the coupons are the same every single year. Yeah, so actually there's a difference depending on depending on the asset we are talking about. Yeah? A bond has a different cash flow characteristic than a stock, and it has a different cash flow characteristic than an option. Yeah, because an option only pays in the case that the actually the value of the underlying, which is the stock or the bond we're talking about, is higher than the relevant value. Yeah, so depending on which asset class you're talking about, the cash flow characteristic is different. So we have these three different subcategories: amortized costs, fair value through profit and loss, or fair value through other comprehensive income. And the measurement depends on the classification. So the measurement depends on which category you choose. The first category can be chosen. Amortized cost can be chosen when the business model is you hold it to collect the cash flows. Yeah, and it can only be chosen when the cash flow characteristic is principal and interest on specified dates. Yeah, so when we're talking about this category, which asset class are we talking about? Which asset class can we put in this category? Can it be a stock? Exactly, yeah. It cannot be a stock. Why? Because a stock does not pay principal and interest on specified days. Instead, what does a stock pay? Stock does not pay interest, but if you are a stockholder, what do you get? The dividend. Exactly. The dividend is the cash flow you receive as a stockholder. So it cannot be principal and interest on specified dates. So as a result, it is only debt securities, which is loans or bonds, can be put in this category. Yeah. So amortized costs is for debt securities or for loans. Fair value through other comprehensive income. Fair value. Do you remember what fair value means? What does fair value means in this context? Fair value actually means market value. So that means market price, exactly. Yeah, very, very good. The market price. That means if you put an asset into that category, the market price becomes the book value on your balance sheet. Which asset classes are allowed to be put in this category? Stocks. Yeah, stocks can be put in that category if they are not held for trading. If they are not held for trading, if they are held for trading, then it's the next category. Then it's fair value through profit and loss. Yeah. So stocks can be put in that category, or debt instruments, yeah, which is bonds, yeah, or loans. If they are not only for collecting cash flows, yeah, if they are only held for collecting cash flow, then you choose the category we just talked about. Yeah, then you choose the category we just talked about, amortized costs. Yeah, but if they are not only for collecting cash flows, if you also want maybe make a gain with them and sell them, then debt instruments can be put in this category, fair value through other comprehensive income. It's kind of an in-between category between amortized costs and fair value through profit and loss. Yeah? Fair value, as you said, is the market price. And that means it's quite volatile on the balance sheet. It's quite volatile. And the book value actually changes very much because you put the market price of the underlying securities on your balance sheet. And that means, of course, for example, stocks can fluctuate. The value of stocks can change very much. And that means the book value on your asset, on your asset side of the balance sheet is also quite volatile, can change very much. So the balance sheet is quite volatile, but the gains and the losses of the stocks, which are not realized, they are not shown in your income statement. Yeah, they are not shown in your income statement. Instead, they are only shown in other comprehensive income. Yeah, in other comprehensive income, OCI. Yeah. So that means the changes are not shown in the income statement and do not influence, for example, earnings per share. Yeah, they only influence other comprehensive income. And then we come to our last category for this, for financial assets, And this is fair value through profit and loss. And here again, fair value means the market price. But the difference to the last category, the difference to fair value through other comprehensive income, is that the gains and the losses, the unrealized gains and losses, are recognized in the income statement. Yeah. So here we recognize them in the income statement, and that means your income statement also becomes quite volatile. Yeah. So this category is not for bonds and loans. Yeah, bonds and loans are not allowed. Yeah, only stocks and all derivatives. Yeah, only stocks and all derivatives. What is a derivative? Do you have an idea of what is a derivative? Derivative is an option no, it's not a fund, actually. Option or a future. It's an option or a future, and it's called derivatives because they are derived from other assets, derived from underlyings. Yeah, and the underlying can be a stock, can be a commodity, whatever. Yeah. And these things, option and futures, they are derived, yeah, from the underlying. Yeah. So all derivatives are also should also be put in this category. So the big difference here between the categories is really how you handle them subsequently. Yeah. Originally, they are both or all recognized with the cost, but subsequently, it really depends on which category you choose, and here really fair value is much more volatile. Yeah, it changes much more because you take the market price, yeah, for fair value through other comprehensive income and fair value through profit and loss. You take the market value, and the market value influences how you handle it on the balance sheet. Amortized costs, here you amortize, you have the asset and you amortize the asset over time. That means you take called the effective interest method. And so the what I mean the interest method. Effective method means that you have a certain effective method, you're part of the interest expense which is not paid out directly. Yeah, and it results from when you have a when you issue or when you buy rather a financial asset at a discount or at a premium, and this premium or discount has to be amortized over time. That means the costs of this premium or discount are spread over the lifetime of the bond. Yeah, and the costs are spread kind of like equally, and that means your how you handle this category on the balance sheet, it is much less volatile. So your balance sheet becomes much less volatile from period to period when you're dealing with amortized costs financial assets. Yeah, so this is really important that you know that fair value, the fair value categories are much more volatile and change much more than when you put it in this amortized costs. Now, when you put an asset which has to be a bond, because as you have heard, stocks are not allowed to put in that category, so it has to be a bond. But here it is very, very, very smooth. Yeah, very smooth. The subsequent handling here is smooth, and here it is. Okay, are there any questions? Did you get it? What is the amortized cost used for? Amortized cost is used for bonds. Yeah, only bonds can be put in this category. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other questions? No. Okay, then we I would suggest we do a break, 15 minutes, and then see you in 15 minutes.